anybody grow up with someone having expectations upon you that maybe you didn't share for yourself? Somebody trying to vicariously live their life through you. And so they had expectations, and they were going to make you be what they wanted to be, but they couldn't be, so they were going to make you be it. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Vicariously throwing all of our expectations. For my dad and for me, it was baseball. Now, one of my favorite movies is a movie by the name of City Slickers. Anybody ever seen that movie? And in City Slickers, there's this one spot where this guy says, my dad and I, we didn't get along, but there was one place my dad and I always had common ground, and it was what? Baseball. My dad played minor league baseball for the St. Louis Cardinals, and because of that, my dad had some inroads, and I got scouted when I was in Little League, a little early, and I played a couple of seasons for the Washington Senators minor league baseball franchise. Now that was before the Washington Senators ceased to exist. Half of the group went up to Minnesota, became the Minnesota Twins, and the other half of the group went down to Texas and became the Texas Rangers. Now before all of that, there's a real mean manager by the name of Ted Williams, and that was the guy I tried out for. And so let me just say that my dad wanted to make sure that when I was in the batter's box, that I was not afraid to be in the batter's box. One of my other favorite movies is a movie by the name called Mr. Baseball. And that is where Tom Selleck goes to Japan, and when the guy looks at me, he says, do you want to hit? And this is what he says, I just don't want to make it out. Now, how many of us go through life just hoping we don't blow it? Or how many of us are going through life saying, through the cross of Christ, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. So instead of going into life expecting to get on base, expecting to be successful, we just go into the batter's box of life saying, what? I just hope I don't make it out. Wow, what a difference. My dad would have me stand in the batter's box, and I would switch hit, so I would stand this way, and he would hit me with the baseball all up and down the left side of my body, until the left side of my body was battered and bruised, and then he would have me go over and bat left-handed and hit me all up and down the right side of my body. He says, this way, when you get in the batter's box, you will know what it feels like to be hit by a pitch. And the ball started taking on unusual looks to me. All of a sudden, that baseball that used to look okay didn't look okay anymore. It was like it was mean and it was angry. Did you know that there used to be a pitcher by the name of Juan Marichal? Anybody know that name? How many of you know that he was one of the meanest pitchers who ever lived? But I want you to look at his face. That was my dad. Now, my dad was not Juan Marichal, but my dad would be laughing and grinning and smiling and beating me in the head with a baseball. And he would be giggling and he would be laughing. But at the same time, he knew he was what? He was making me grow character and grow strength in the batter's box. Did you know that it hurts to get hit by a baseball? Did you know that it hurts to get hit by a baseball? Did you know that it can sometimes put you out of commission for months to get hit by a baseball? Sometimes it really hurts to get hit by a baseball. But my dad said this, that no matter what happens, every time you get into the batter's box of any level of baseball you will ever face, I will have already beamed you harder than everybody else could possibly beat you. And guess what? That worked.
Oh, yeah?
All the way through high school, no matter who the pitcher was, I would say, my dad throws harder than this guy. And then when I tried out for Major League Baseball, I didn't make it, but I was in the minors. My dad throws harder than this guy. My dad throws twice as hard. My dad's hit me twice as hard as this guy can even throw the ball over the plate. And it really gave me strength in the batter's box from my earliest ages. And these are not me. There are some pictures of me playing baseball in my office. But no matter how young I was or how old I was not afraid of the baseball ever again. And what a difference that made. Did you know that sometimes God purposely sets us up to be hit by life so that we will not be afraid of life anymore? Did you know that? Yeah. God will purposely set you up to be hit by life so that we're not afraid of life anymore. And on those days, what does he say? Stand firm. Stand firm. If you have your Bible, I know this passage can be hard to find. Let's see if we can find Genesis 22. Genesis 22. One of my favorite sounds is to hear the rustling of pages. But in this day and age with all the electronic Bibles, You don't hear that as much. You know, Dave and I have an ongoing debate which better, real Bibles or electric Bibles. And I'll tell you what, Dave, you're right when it comes to hearing the pages turn. Nothing sounds as sweet as hearing the pages rustle, knowing that you're looking those up. But if I hear the click, 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 that'll sound just as sweet to me as well. All right, so Genesis chapter 22. Let's go ahead. How many of us already know what's going to happen in this passage? How many of us already know that Abraham is going to be commanded by God to go take a son and offer him? And how many of us would say, oh, I already know this story. I've already learned all I need to know about this story. Let's stand firm for a little while together. And after these things, God tested Abraham. Now, how many of you like tests? I love them. I just love them. If somebody says there's going to be a test, I love it. I love going to college. I love going to seminary. In fact, I've got just about 6 months left either to renew. I had been accepted to go and finish another doctorate at Trinity Church, Oxford. And so I've got about 6 months left of that contract that if I really wanted to go and get another doctorate degree, I could go to England and study at Oxford and come out with another doctorate of Old Testament Hebrew. And I've got to let them know within the next 6 months whether or not I'm going to fulfill that. You know what? Part of me says, oh, I love that. How many of us say, yes, more study? Yes, more tests. Yes, more reading. Yes, more papers to write. Yes, more scrutiny from more professors. Yes, I love that stuff. I just love that stuff. How many of you think that man is crazy? Yes. Okay, I love that stuff. How many of us love it when God says, I'm going to give you a test? How many of us just wish God would overlook that and give Pastor Larry a test? Give it to somebody else. I mean, I love the fact that God wants to cause this to happen, but did you know in the Hebrew, this does not mean to find out how bad you are. Now, when I was doing some of my doctoral work, we had a professor who had just finished his doctorate degree. And the way he felt good about himself was to create exams, final exams, that would prove to him that we were not as smart as him. So instead of giving us a test to evaluate whether or not we knew the material, the way he felt good about himself was by flunking us. Anybody ever have one of those kind of? Now hear me. That could still be your dad. Could be your mom. Could be you. At your place of work, where you give somebody a task and you know they're not ready for that task, and George takes on an apprentice and he says, all right, I want you to go up there and do, and he knows that that person doesn't have the skills, and if he sends them up there, he's setting him up to fail. God he never sets us up to fail. If God gives us a test, it is to grow our character, an opportunity, and He will not ask us to go beyond what we're able. Anybody know 1 Corinthians 10:13? And God has promised to never give us or allow us to be caught up in a temptation or in a trial or in a test that He hasn't already known that we can successfully navigate and in the end grow up our character and provide a way of escape and a way of value. Did you know that the way in which we grow character is not by doing menial tasks, but by doing difficult tasks and succeeding in them? How do you get self-esteem? You don't get self-esteem by doing something simple that you should be able to do. You get self-esteem by doing something that challenges you and causes you to go above and beyond what you can already do and become even better at doing something. I think one of the things that really caused low self-esteem in the United States was the invention of Velcro. Now we laugh about that, but what's one of the things that kindergartners learns how to do? Tie their shoes. What do they learn how to do now? Velcro. In other words, our kids are too dumb to tie their shoes anymore. Now hear me. What are we trying to say? We're trying to make it what for them? Easier. And every time we make it easier, we're really saying to them, I don't want you to be challenged. But how do we build it? And then we have a whole generation of no self-esteem because we never allowed them to have challenges and then help them successfully navigate those challenges. So we just make it easier and easier and easier and easier. And in the end, what do we end up with? Dummied down. And guess what? We do it in the church too. But sometime after this, God gave Abraham a test. And He said to him, go. Verse number 2. Take your son, your only son, Isaac. There ought to be pictures of John 3:16 in there, right? For God so loved the world that He sent His one and only begotten Son. Take your one and only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go. He wants you to go. Now, sometimes when God tests you, the rest of your family is involved in the test as well. Is that right? Yes, it is, like it or not. And so if I navigate the test, I'm not only going to have the chance to grow my character, I am going to be used by God to help what? Everybody else's character grow, or what? Everybody else's character to falter. Wow. And he says, I want you to go to Moriah. Interesting phrase. If you go to 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse number 1, it says, and Solomon picked a place for him to build the temple of the Lord. And he built it, guess where? Moriah. On Moriah mountainside. Did you know that if you go into the holy city, on the backside you come up out of the wall of descending death, and you get to the top, coming out of the Kidron Valley, from the Mount of Olives, you end up at the eastern gate, and right off the eastern gate is Solomon's temple. And then it's right on the front edge of the Moriah mountainside. There is a road that meanders around and goes over to the next road that leads up and out of the city and then down into the Jericho Valley. And guess what the name of that road is? It's called the Via Dolorosa. Anybody ever hear that?
Yeah.
It's the way of what?
Death.
It's a way of suffering and death. And what is the last little mountain over here before you leave the city? It's called Golgotha. Right on the edge of the mountainside called what? Moriah. In other words, I want you to take your son and go to the place where later I'm going to take my son. Did you know that God will never ask you to do something that he and his son is not already foreplanned that they're going to do too? Wow. Now, he says, and I want you to do an offering. When you get there, I want you to do an offering. This is the word for offering, oh-ah. And so what does this literally mean? It literally means that when you get there, you're going to do something, you are going to wholly dedicate it to me. In other words, when you get there, you're going to wholly dedicate Isaac to me. So you're not just going to go there and throw, what's that party that we have in our Spanish culture when someone turns 15 years old? We have that one? What is it called? It is called pate. What do they have in the South? A debutante. What do we have in the church? For those of us who are Hebrew in background, we have what? Bar mitzvah. In other words, we have this rites of passage. Did you know that we ought to be training up our kids so that they will be totally dedicated to the Lord, and we don't have to wait till they're 15 years old? That's right. And so we're totally dedicated. Now, how do you totally dedicate your child to the Lord? Abba Daddy's got to be totally dedicated to the Lord. Okay, he says, I want you to take your son. Now, how many of us, if you would have known, that means you are going to go and you are going to kill your son on the altar. He is going to bleed out. He is going to die. And how many of you would say, let's just wait till tomorrow. Let's just wait till tomorrow night. Can we put this off for a week? I mean, Mark can't even get out of praise team practice because he's got to go swim at the pool. And so, we sometimes have got to say, let's prioritize this, God. You know, I would really like to go be a missionary, but first of all, how did they say to Jesus in the New Testament? I will gladly follow you, but first of all, let me go bury my father. Did you know that the phrase that he uses for let me go bury my father means that my daddy's not dead yet, but when he does, I'll get around to it. Let me first of all go do this, let me first of all go do that. In other words, Abraham didn't wait, he got up early the next day. Now I know some of you get up early, like the crack of noon, but as soon as you get up, you're on it. Yeah, I mean, you are just right on it. And notice he not only gets up early, and he rose up early in the morning, he saddled his donkey, he took 2 more of his young men with him, because there was accountability there. You see, when they go, and the young men were with them, who else could tell the story about Abraham and Isaac? Did you know that sometimes you need to have a posse? What does that mean? That means you need to have some people around you that when God does something, you could say, George, isn't that true? And George goes, I was there. They tell you another reason you need to have an entourage. Because sometimes Satan will try to tempt you when you're all by yourself. And you would never give in to that temptation if all those other people were around you. I know a lot of pastors that when they go on conventions, they invite 2 or 3 of the guys from the church to go with them and to stay in hotel rooms with them. Not because they just love being around those guys, but they love the accountability of holiness that they bring with them. It is dangerous to think that you can go 3 days right away from the presence of your wife without having some people with you, without having you falter potentially. Dangerous, dangerous place to go. And he saddles up the donkey, and he gets 2 more people. It says that he goes ahead and he gets Isaac, he grabs the wood, and he grabs the fire. Now, this word here for firewood is an incredible word. In Hebrew, it's asf. And what does that mean? It means the tree. In other words, I want you to go to the place where the cross is going to be, and I want you to take the tree with you. Now, what do they call the cross in the New Testament? The tree. And he was hung on the tree. This is the Hebrew concept of the New Testament reality of soteriology, the salvation by the cross. And so he says, I want you to take the tree. And where do I want you to erect the tree? Golgotha. Anybody see some beautiful similarity here? And he says, I want you to take the tree with you. Now hear me. If you are not taking Jesus with you and your cross with you, no matter where you go, it'll be too late to go find him. I need to be ready for my Moriah. I got to have my cross with me already. I can't wait till I get there and look for a tree. In other words, I've got to go prepared into the fastballs of life, into the wiles of the world. And he says on the third day, verse number 4, and on the third day Abraham lifted up his eyes and he saw the place from afar. What do you think went through his mind? It's over now. Is that what you think? There it is. It's all over now. I don't know what you think. When I'm standing in the batter's box and my dad was throwing the ball and it was like 2 inches away from my face, the thing that flashed through my mind is what? It's all over now. I can't get out of the way fast enough for this not to hit me. Did you know that this phrase, and he lifted up his eyes, meant, and he worshiped the Lord? When he saw the troubles of life, instead of saying, it's over now, he said, God's in control. And he worshiped the Lord. In the midst of his rocky life, in the midst of all of the difficulties, in the midst of the fact that his son is about to die, he lifted up his eyes. What is the sign of depression? What is the sign of elation? He lifted up his eyes because he already had a lifted up spirit. And when he saw 3 days later, he lifted up his eyes and he saw. I want you to notice something. Verse 5. Then Abraham said to the young men, you stay here with the donkeys, and I and the boy will go over there and worship, and we will come back to you again. Now stop right there for a second. Did he know that Isaac is about to die? But what did he already have faith in? He had a faith that if Isaac died, Isaac would what?
Raise up.
He'd be raised. Isaac, you are going to die, but you're coming back to life. And how many of us would get up? Have you ever met those optimistic people? Don't you hate them? Oh, don't worry, Pastor Ray. And you go, what? Are you kidding? Don't you know that? Don't you know? Don't you know? Don't you know? And God is saying, can't you just shut up from that? Now remember, what was the great advice that Chuck Swindoll got from his dad before he went in the Marines? Grow up, shut up, man up. Wow. And so it says, he says to the other people, you stay right here. My boy and I are going to go, and we will come back. Now I want you to notice that in verse number 6, and Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering, and he laid it on Isaac, his son. Now how many of you have seen the original photos that Isaac right now is like between 4, 5, 6 years old?
No.
Isaac is probably somewhere between 18 and 20. He's not some little boy.
No.
He is a young man. Strong enough. In fact, many people say they can't prove it, and I can't either, but I believe it, that in order to climb up the side of the rock to get the Moriah to Golgotha, he may have had to help Abraham get there.
Yeah, that's true.
Because he's carrying the wood, he's got the fire. Abraham, he's lifting him up and carrying him over there, trying to make sure that he gets over there too. And so he goes ahead and he lays everything on Isaac. The fire, the tree. And he looks at his daddy, and what does he say? He said, my father, in verse 27. He said, behold the fire, and behold the wood. But where is the lamb for the burnt offering? You know what that says to me? He understood worship.
Yeah.
You know, if he had never been to worship, he would have never known that they would take the lamb, they would slaughter the lamb. The word for slaughter in Hebrew means purify it unto the Lord. It does mean take its life, but it means to give it to the Lord. Jesus was slaughtered on the cross. But did God just slaughter him, or did God save us? And so, yes, the lamb would have been slaughtered. And he was the lamb who was crucified before the foundation of the world. He was slaughtered for the sake of sin. And so he says, you're going to take your son, and don't worry. Abraham had taught him. What does that mean? that before they ever got to the point where Isaac's faith was going to get tested along with Abraham's faith, Abraham had already brought him up into true worship. Oh, guys, gals, all of us, how important is it to not just go to church, but to lead your children into worship during the other days of life? During the Mondays and the Thursdays and the Fridays of life. You see, it is one thing to go to worship, but it's another thing to bring worship to the rest of the week. Because here it wasn't the day to go to tabernacle. He says, all right, I know we're going to go do worship, and I know what worship is all about, and I know that this isn't the tabernacle yet to begin, but he knows what he's talking about. And he says, we've got all of the elements, but we don't have the lamb. And I want you to notice the faith. He says, don't worry. Now, Isaac is going to be the lamb, is that right? But what does he say? He says, Elohim Racha. Now, how many of us say, no, he said Jehovah Jireh. How many of us know that Jehovah Jireh is from the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament? And so from the Greek version of the Old Testament, it means, and God will provide. But if you look at the Hebrew version of the Old Testament, it's Elohim Racha. Now, what does the word Elohim mean? It means the great creator God. The great creator. Who created the test that Abraham is in? God. Who knows the right answers? God. Could you imagine walking in to take a test in one of your classes and having your professor sit down right next to you and tell you all the answers to every question? Would that be awesome? Wouldn't that be awesome? To have, the professor just comes in, sits down right next to George, and he says, okay, George, number 1, B, number 2, C, number 3, C, number 4, A, and you go, okay. Because why would he have faith to write down those answers? Because he knows he created the test. I can have faith in Elohim. Did you know that God has already given you all the answers to every test you will ever have? It's called the Bible. And you know what? It's an open book test. In other words, you don't have to just put your Bible away and just say, okay, where's that verse? Okay, where's that verse? He lets you Google it. Can you imagine sitting in your classroom and they have, all right, what's the formula for this? And you go, oh, I'm supposed to memorize this formula. Don't worry, take out your iPads and Google it and write it down. Just don't do Wikipedia because, they can write wrong answers in there. Be careful with Wikipedia. Wow. And so who is Elohim Racha? Elohim Racha is the God who created the test, the God who knows the answers, and the God who will see to it that you pass. I had a professor one time say this, the only way you will flunk this class is if you don't allow me to help you pass. I won't let you fail. Think about that. God won't let us fail unless we choose to not let Him help us. So they went. Oh man, this is such an incredible thought. At the end of verse number 8, God will provide Himself. He will see it. He will see to it. He will provide a lamb. So they went, both of them, together. You know what that means? That Isaac had faith in Abraham. And that's all he needed. He had so much faith in his daddy that if his daddy was going to leave him there, his daddy would take care of him. And Abraham had so much faith in Abba God that if God took him there, he had so much faith that God would take care of him there. In other words, I don't need to know what's going to happen. I just need to know who I'm walking with. And if I'm walking with people I know really love me, the creator of the test, I'm walking a really secure walk. And so I don't need to know the questions to the test. How many of us say, hey, did anybody get a copy of the test? I don't need a copy of the test. God's taken it for me. The only way I'm going to flunk if I say, look out, let me answer that one, Jesus. Isn't that what we do? Yeah. Look out, let me take care of this one, Jesus. And you know what Jesus will do? He'll just say, okay. If you wish. Wow. So they went there together, and when they came to the place, in verse number 9, and when they came to the place which God had told them about, in other words, it wasn't some place, God picked the place in advance for the test. Did you know that God knows exactly where you're going in your life? And did you know that if you will just allow Him and allow Him to lead you, you will not just get someplace, you'll get to His place. I love GPS. God's positional sovereignty. You see, all I have to do is punch in on my GPS, Jesus. And I just go where the car tells me.
Huh.
I never end up where I was thinking I was going to go. But I end up being where God knows my character will go. See, how many of us are still dependent upon ourselves? I know a better route, Jesus. I know a safer route, Jesus. I know a shorter route, Jesus. And Jesus is just saying what? But I want you to end up where I want you to end up.
That's right.
How about if you just put yourself in my hands instead of expecting me to allow you to put me in yours? You see, I don't need Jesus in my hand. I need to be in the hand of Jesus. Amen. And when they got to the place, Abraham built his altar. Now, let's remember, what are the elements of the altar? He has the rocks. Those are the rocks that are right there. That means that he took what was going on in the world. He took the rocks of Moriah, the rocks of your life. It might be your finances. It might be your relationships. It might be your job. It might be your school. It might be your lack of school. It might be your teacher. It might be your mom. It might be your kids. In other words, whatever it is that's the rock pile of your life, he expects you to take that and stick the cross in it. He expects you to show up and put the cross in the rocks of life. How do we defeat this world? In this world we will have tribulation. How do we overcome tribulation? With the cross. And so you take the cross and you put it in the problem. And then we put on the Son. Anybody see this in the life of Abraham and Isaac? Anybody see this in John? When Jesus said, the only way to truly know that you are loved is a man who will lay down his life for those he loves. And at this moment, he pulls out the knife. And as he is about to slaughter his son, all of a sudden the angel of the Lord cries out, Abraham, he went, what? I think it kind of, it was one of those release, cry out, afraid of what they might ask next, but at the same time praying that God will save his son. Don't lay a hand on him. He says, for now I know. Now, the question of, didn't God know that he was going to fulfill the test? Did he know in advance? The answer to that was yes. He says, now I know that you know you passed the test. Anybody ever been given a test that takes 2 or 3 months to get the answers to? And every day you go, oh, I don't know if I passed the test. I wonder if I passed the test. I'm not sure I passed the test. I wonder if I passed the test. I don't know how the interview went. I wonder how they thought the interview went. I thought the interview went well. What do you think? I don't know. I wasn't there. But I think the interview went well. Margaret took this test in order to keep her teacher's license. They gave her 2 years to finish up some classes and to take this test. And they let her have a provisional license to teach this class at the high school. But as soon as she took the test, whether she passed it or not, they were going to immediately allow her to stay or immediately remove her from the classroom.
Wow.
And for 2 months, it was, I think I did well. I don't know if I did well. I don't know if I passed it. I think I passed it. I don't think I passed it. I don't know if I passed it. I don't know if I passed it. And every day, anybody ever go to the mailbox every day? Every day, back to the mailbox, back to the mailbox. And then she found out that they will post them online. She lived on that website. I don't know if I passed it. I think I passed it. I don't know if I passed it. You think I passed it? No, you don't know anything. And I think I might have passed it. No? Yeah. And so it was just all the time. At the early service, did she not confess to this very same thing?
Not exactly.
Yes, she did. It was worse than that. I know what you mean. Yes, you're right. It was even worse than that. You are right. This is one you can ask her about. Because every day, all I heard every day was, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. Anybody ever been there? And you know the greatest thing is when all of a sudden, she took 2 parts of the test. She only had to take the first part and pass it. But in order to get the next credential, she was going to have to take the second part. And she said, I'm going to take both parts the first time. This way, when I flunk the second half, I'll know what the questions are, and I'll be able to pass it the next time. She passed both parts. And all of a sudden, I heard this, yeah! I said, I think she passed. I didn't even have to think about it. You know, isn't there such a joy when you know that you applied the cross to the rock of your life in the midst of the worst situation you could possibly think of. And God brought you through. incredible thought. And all of a sudden, Abraham, he says, and now I know that you know you passed the test. What happened to Abraham? His faith was expanded. You see, he didn't Velcro it back together again for you. He didn't dummy it down. He gave him the most difficult test that he said, and I'll walk it with you. You're not on your own here. Did God provide?
Yes.
Yes, He did. Did Abraham believe?
Yes.
All right, let's take a look at this. Fabulous fathers today. Wouldn't we like to be more like Abraham and Isaac? And ladies, wouldn't you like to be more like Abraham and Isaac? Let's think about this for a second. What do we need to do? In Genesis 15:6, and look these up and write these down. It says that Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Anybody ever heard that verse? Abraham believed God, and he trusted God. Did you know the word belief and the word trust in the Greek is the same word? It's not a different word, it's the same word. He believed and trusted. It's sort of like bed and breakfast, but not bed or breakfast. He believed and trusted. And because he believed and trusted, he was given credit. What is credit? That's having more than you thought you did. That's going to the bank and saying, well, I'm going to check and see how much money we have in there. Wow, all of a sudden we got a bunch more money. Where did that come from? You were being given a credit. In other words, when God takes the test for you, you might have gotten a B and God gets an A++, and you get all the extra credit. And Abraham believed and he got extra credit. And it was credited to him as what? Righteousness. If we go to James chapter 2 and take a look at verses 21, 22, and 23, what do we find? And Abraham believed the Lord, and then he did the actions that were required by the test. Now, how was he credited here in Genesis 22? He said, take your son. What did he do? Took him. What if he had just said, I think I'll just go on my own?
Yeah.
What if he just said, I won't take the other two guys? What if he just said, we're going to go over there and we're just going to kneel down and pray. Don't worry about the wood. Don't worry about the fire. We don't need that. What if he had made the trip, the 3-day trip to Moriah, make the 3-day trip back, and he wouldn't have gone through with the potential of slaughtering of his son? In other words, he not only had to know what the test was and credited his righteousness and belief, he had to actually walk through the valley of the shadow of death. He had to participate by his actions. And what does it say in James chapter 1, verse number 23? And it was what? Credited to him as righteousness. If we go to Hebrews chapter 11. And that great chapter of faith. And it says this, and Abraham believed that his son was literally going to die. It was not going to be just, oh, well, you know, we'll just put him on the altar and we'll pray as if he died. He was going to literally kill his son. But he believed that God would raise him from the dead. And you know what? He had absolutely no proof that that would happen. He just had faith in God, and faith was credited to him as righteousness. You know, I don't need proof. I need Jesus. That's all I need. Because He will never allow me to be forsaken. He will never leave me abandoned. He will never leave me halfway into my Mariahs and then say, oops, my bad. If God leads us, He will lead us all the way. No matter. Now what does no matter mean? There's no yeah buts. There's no yeah buts. You ready for this? No matter. Well, what about? No, there's no what abouts. There's no yeah buts. They're not. Well, hypothetically speaking, well, let me just play the devil's advocate. No matter what Satan, let's bring him into it to begin with. No matter what Satan may throw at you, God is able to provide. Amen. And the reason you get beamed by life so many times is to provide you a golden opportunity to grow up, shut up, and man up. What a great. It's time for us men, and all of us, but specifically this month, what do we need to do? We need to stand in the box. We need to stand firm. When the winds of life and the pebbles are being thrown at us, and Satan is throwing us fastballs at our face, what do? We stand firm. Why? Because the cross can be applied to that problem, and the Son will be applied to that cross, and the application will be victory in my life. Here's our phrase I want you to think about this week. Are you ready? Here we go. Here is the wood. Here is the fire. You ready? We are the offering. You might even say it this way. Here is the wood. Isn't that what Isaac said? Daddy, here's the wood, here's the fire, but where is the lamb? Here's the answer, Espy. Here's the wood. Here is the fire. What would Espy say? I am the offering. I am the offering. I don't just give God my money. I don't just give my exoteric thinking. I don't just pray before I go to bed and when I get up in the morning. Every day. What was the name of that song? Make me an offering. Every day. I want to be an offering. Every day I've got to be willing to say what? I'll go to Moriah with you, Jesus. Now you don't die on the cross for sins. You know what you do? You live at the cross in victory.